Top Nigerian leaders under the National Consultative Forum are asking former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, to lead a body of former presidents and heads of state to President Muhammadu Buhari. They want President Buhari to hold a special session of National Council of State that would table the current agitations of Nigerians for a restructured country to stop the threat to the country's existence. The eminent personalities who will converge under the banner of leaders of the conscience in Abuja include former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Gali Umar Nahaba, Professor Patu Tomi, former Minister Obieze Kwesili, among others. They also want the powers of the state governors reduced, as they claim that the governors have hijacked Nigeria's democracy.
We are calling on the elder statesmen to temporarily halt their well-deserved rest and take the task of saving Nigerians from complete destruction. In this regard, former president, former head of state, all the former service chiefs and so on will be co-opted into a national elders committee. The former head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, is also being requested to call a meeting of the presidents and heads of states and vice presidents so that the serving president may call for an enlarged council of state meeting, which will also include other former military governors and state governors, both serving and retired. And this will also be with the representation of the youth. The purpose of this meeting is to be able to correct the defects in leadership structure or leadership failure in Nigeria itself.
Whether we are in government or not, we feel responsible enough to come out and meet and douse the tension that is bedeviling this country.
This group is also trying to communicate to those in power and those around the world who are watching Nigeria that the Nigerian people are united in wanting better government, that the Nigerian people are together. As our national anthem used to say, the old one, though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand.
All right, we'll open this for a chat this morning. Huh?
Well, I find it curious that the people who are being asked to go and intervene and talk with the president are people who themselves had the chance to restructure Nigeria and failed to do so. But it's okay. I suppose mistakes can always be corrected. And I actually, apart from that one point, I back this call. All hands do need to be on deck. And it just stresses the fact that we can all see this is a problem here. And another call that this group made, of eminent Nigerians made, is that all politicking and campaigning for 2023 should be suspended for now while we address the pressing issues of our actual existence. I've had cause to compare on this show political campaigning and, jostling for position in 2023 to rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We hope Nigeria never sinks, but we are actually in an emergency. And we're talking about 2023. It's very bold of anybody to presume that the situation will remain such that elections in 2023 will hold at this point. What we're dealing with is frankly existential. It's frankly frightening. And I do hope that this eminent group will be attended to, will be given the respect that they deserve, rather than those of us who have been making the similar clamor for restructuring. Different social political groups all over the country have been making their clamor for restructuring, and they've all been ignored. Especially galling is the fact that restructuring was the linchpin of APC's change agenda in 2023. No political party can just casually jettison a political contract that they have entered into with the electorate, that elected them based on that agenda. Then you now get into power and you completely ignore it. It's actually unconscionable.
Okay, well, in terms of the principle, I think there's nothing wrong in a group of persons coming together, eminent Nigerians or even ordinary Nigerians, and saying that the time has come to save Nigeria, because the country is tottering on the brink of the precipice. I think there is an emergent consensus in that regard. But what they've done is to say, General Yakubu Gowon, former head of state of Nigeria, leader of the Nigeria Praise Movement, should lead a team to the president. They are more or less calling for a National Council of State meeting. Now, who are in that National Council of State? The president himself is the chairman of the Council of State. Other members, all the governors of the Federation, former Supreme Court Chief Justices, the Speaker of the House of Reps, the Senate President, these are persons that are there. And that National Council of State is a constitutional organ. But people should be reminded of the fact that it is strictly an advisory body, and its functions are properly spelled out in the Constitution. It advises on national honors, it advises on prerogative of mercy, it advises on National Population Commission and such issues. However, the president, the buck still stops at the desk of the president. He can choose, if he so wishes, to ignore any advice. And that is where the problem is. And not even General Yakubu Gowon or any former president is in a position to dictate to a sitting president. Yeah. They can offer advice, and I'm sure, they've been doing it through various means, either through a letter writing, as one of our fathers prefers, or through direct contact or telephone calls. But the person to take the responsibility for taking such certain consequential steps with regard to policy making and the direction of the country is the man who sits in the saddle. Is President Buhari willing to listen to any call? Is President Buhari ready to listen to anybody's advice? Is he even on very good terms with most of the members of the Council of State? General Gowon does not have the powers to summon a meeting of the National Council of State. That meeting can only be summoned at the pleasure of the president. Will he summon such a meeting? So these are the issues. But at the level of principle, yes, these eminent Nigerians, they are in order to say, former presidents, former leaders, prominent persons in Nigeria who are members of the Council of State should approach the president and ask for a meeting. But you know how a sitting president and former presidents in Nigeria, how they operate. They try as much as possible to respect each other's boundaries. But definitely, Nigeria needs to be saved, and every voice should be listened, every voice of reason. And statesmen, should speak up, they should intervene, they should explore every channel to see how they can offer advice. Whether that advice will be taken or not is another matter.
Very, very well said, Dr. Abati, and still about this meeting. So I think the bright spot will be another meeting being summoned by some elders and President Olusegun Obasanjo being part of them. This is aside from, the former president here. And let's see how that pans out in the coming days. Let's see the conversations they have. But like you said rightly, both of you, that we need to reach out across the aisle. Nigeria's at a precipice now. We need statesmen. It's in time of crisis we know statesmen. This is not the time for very unsavory rhetoric. This is not the time for rattling, saber rattling. This is the time to focus on what binds us together, the state of our union. The state of our union today is not great, but we need to make it great again. We need to bring everybody together. The over 450 tribal groups we have in this country that are part of this strong union called Nigeria, we need to bring all of them together. We need to sit at the table, we need to talk about the union, and the leadership and the presidency needs to listen to people, and then we can form a stronger union and look forward to development. There's so much to be done. This is not the time to kill ourselves in this country. And that's all on News Headline. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Rotus, Michael, Desua, Aaron to give us updates on Africa, global business, COVID-19, sporting activities across the globe. You just have to stay with us.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Adiri is here to give us an African business update. Over to you, Rotus.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to all our viewers. The African Business Update is pretty much focused on Nigeria's new revised GDP growth forecast coming from the World Bank, which was released yesterday. They're essentially revising it upwards by about 0.7 percentage points to 1.8%. That's for GDP growth for 2021. Initial forecast back in January was 1.1%. I'd like for us to focus on the factors, because whenever these forecasts, again, this is just a forecast. So they could hit the mark, they could miss it. But there's four key pillars or key assumptions that the World Bank is making. And they're saying that these are going to be important in order for that forecast to be realized. The first one is elevated oil prices. That's the first World Bank assumption that they're making. Crude oil right now is at $70 a barrel. As you know, majority of our FX income that Nigeria brings in comes from oil. That's the reason why we fell into a recession twice in the last 4 years. Back in 2015 and then again in 2020, oil prices fell, oil prices crashed, and subsequently, we fell into recession. So the first assumption is that oil prices remain elevated. There's a number of factors to look at. We had the OPEC joint ministerial meeting OPEC plus ministerial meeting not too long ago. They're going to be slowly easing their output curves, giving Nigeria a little more leeway with respect to production in July. But you have to look at the Iran nuclear deal and whether Iran comes back into the market later on. Possible COVID-19 flare-ups that could affect demand. But for now, if those elevated prices remain where they are, then we are in good shape. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is on oil and gas reform. And there's three letters beginning with a P. We've been waiting for this particular bill to be passed now for more than 20 years. Speaker of the House, Gbajabiamila, we had Chinemerem Joseph, we had a special on this yesterday where he was speaking to delegates at the recent oil and gas conference, the NIPS conference, where he said that the petroleum industry bill, that's the three letters with the P, that's the reform that the World Bank is referring to, would be finally passed this month of June. The last target that they had was in April. He said it was going to be passed in April, and now, I don't know if they're just, throwing darts on a board here or how they're picking their dates. I'll leave it to you three to let me know how confident you are that it's going to be passed. But, that's pillar number 2 from the World Bank. Oil and gas reform. The petroleum industry bill has to be passed and has to be implemented. The third assumption is on foreign exchange management. FSDH, one of the brokerage houses, put out a foreign exchange notes, a research report, 15, 16 pages, talking about the central bank's quest to unify the exchange rate. If you remember, about a week ago, the central bank, of course, removed the 380 exchange rate, replaced it with the NAFEX rate of 410 on their website. For the past year, that 380 rate hasn't been relevant. It's NAFEX that we've been using. So the CBN has been moving steadily towards FX unification. The World Bank says that is the third pillar that is going to, pretty much the economic growth forecast is predicated on. FX management is based on supply, right? And you have to sell more things to bring in more FX. Right now, we're still dependent on oil. Nigeria has to diversify FX income and sell more items overseas in order to bring in more FX, increase the supply in order to assist the management of foreign exchange. You look at our import bill, you look at how many of us are dependent on foreign exchange for school fees, medical services, so on and so forth. The fourth pillar is vaccines. There's the big news that the MasterCard Foundation has pledged $1.3 billion towards the African CDC, Center for Disease Control, in vaccine proliferation across Africa. The African Union is looking at vaccinating 750 million Africans by 2022. To date, only 2% of Africa's population have received at least one vaccine dose. And in order to reduce the gap between the developed countries and the developing nations, we have to have more vaccine scaling and vaccine proliferation. So that's the fourth pillar. So 1, elevated oil prices. 2, oil and gas reform. 3, FX management, FX supply. 4, vaccine proliferation across Nigeria. Those are the 4 pillars upon which the World Bank is saying that we will hopefully have GDP growth of 1.8%. But it has to be said, Doctor has mentioned this in the past, population growth. Nigeria's GDP growth versus population growth, even at 1.8%. In fact, for 2022, the World Bank says we should grow at 2.1% or 2.2%. Population growth is at 2.6, 2.7%. So if you're not growing beyond your population, more people are falling into poverty. So that's what we have ahead of us. That's what has to be scaled. That's our update.
Well, if the World Bank is saying that we should be expecting a growth of 1.8% on the basis of those assumptions that you have identified, where the initial projection for 2021 by the World Bank was 1.1%, I think in February. So in the June Global Economic Prospect, they've now revised it to say 1.8%. And that in fact by 2022, what is this thing that economists say, all things being equal, ceteris paribus, that we could expect 2.1%. But you are right, even at 1.8% that is projected, some people may say, well, 0.51 growth, GDP growth in the first quarter of 2021, that's some kind of progress. And, up from, was it 0.11% in the fourth quarter of 2020, but still, all of this, all things considered, is still nothing to jubilate about. Because, what Nigeria needs is actually double-digit growth for us to be able to scratch the surface. And all those variables or assumptions that they have put forward, I think you left out the point about forex management, that's exchange rate, management, flexible exchange rate management. Are we going to be able to achieve that? There's also the talk about oil. Can we say, that is certain, considering the fact that after the initial, surge in oil prices, now with demand going down in China, with India having issues, the present price, spot price of Brent crude may not be sustainable. And then there are issues also on the production side of it. I think what is important, is for Nigeria to know that we have very serious issues. Yes, there may be some kind of recovery. COVID, don't let me say post-COVID recovery, but there's some kind of global economic recovery. But there will be variations in terms of how countries, regions can take advantage of that. Now, the same World Bank Global Economic Prospect is talking about global economic growth, but there will be variations that has to be taken into consideration. And that variation will be more marked between developed countries, where you have good leadership, and low and middle income countries that have a lot to grapple with. Now, the report also says in Africa, there will be growth. We'll witness growth in Angola, in South Africa, in addition to Nigeria, in sub-Saharan Africa. But again, the bigger challenge is how countries deal with, the post-COVID era and what structures they have in place to be able to move their economies forward. So opinion, understandably, is divided on the World Bank projections.
That leads me to a question. It said in that World Bank report that South Africa and Angola managed to keep a handle on their inflation. How did they do that? And also, we've been pegged at 1.8% growth rate. So pardon me if I'm not doing cartwheels about that kind of very modest growth. Whereas China, 8.5%, it hardly seems fair, does it? I have to say.
Great point. It doesn't seem fair at all. But China, China is the second largest economy in the globe. So, yeah.
Rosa, I just want to quickly make my point. You see, that's why people and economic watchers don't really believe in the World Bank. And that's why the likes of Julius Nyerere, former president of Tanzania, will call IMF the International Ministry of Finance. At first, the first peg, what was the first peg, Rotus? The first peg was PIB. PIB.
You mean the first forecast?
Yeah, the first forecast was what?
Okay. 1.1%, but the oil prices was one, and two was oil and gas reform. That's two.
Oil and gas reform is not possible now. There is no certainty that they're going to pass the PIP. So basing that on oil and gas reform is null and void. We've just kept on pushing the date till whenever it's convenient for us. Secondly, you talked about oil. The World Bank didn't put into cognizance that we have under-recovery going on. We are still paying subsidies. So even if you make all of that oil proceed money, it still goes back to paying subsidy. Two states over the past couple of months can't collect money from FARC. You said currency. We've not been able to put a good hold on currency. There was a report that came out the other day that says that some BDCs are still getting Forex for $3.94 and they are selling it for $4.90 something. So BDCs are making a killing on all of this. Those are the factors on ground. So I wonder how the World Bank economists come with their projections without pretty much doing the great work of profiling a country and looking deeply at what is happening on ground. Because when you look at all of those parameters, as you were reading them out, I was just laughing, because they are not like, well, they are factors that are militating against those parameters that are on ground. I mean, if we had more time, I'll talk more on this. But thank you so much for your time, Rotus.
Thank you, Rotus. Moving on to more business updates. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. A bit of a waiting game, really. Once again, basically waiting for inflation figures from the United States tomorrow and the all-important FOMC meeting, Federal Open Markets Committee meeting next week in the United States, to give us an idea of whether those inflation fears that everybody's worried about are actually moving central banks in any particular way, starting with the Fed, of course. So as far as Asia-Pacific markets are concerned, then this morning, Wall Street having a relatively sideways day, Nasdaq slightly up. Once again, the Asia's been trading in relatively tight ranges. Shanghai up about 0.4%, Nikkei down about 0.25%. China inflation. Now, we got some producer prices actually coming out from China there. That's a measure of production costs. Rose 9% in May from a year ago. That's about the global commodity rally and also pandemic supply chain disruption. That's made themselves felt. But basically, the question is, will these costs be passed on to consumers or will they be absorbed by factories? And basically, Chinese officials have also been talking about trying to contain the rise in commodity prices. How they do that's up to them, really. But in a sense, that's kept all that sort of not so much dumbing down, but quietening down any anxieties about rising inflation has helped the markets there. As far as the United States is concerned, they passed, and this is an important bipartisan act, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, $250 billion bill aimed at countering China's technological ambitions. The scope of the bill, for example, provides $52 billion to fund the semiconductor and research, design and manufacturing initiatives. President Joe Biden has applauded the bill's package. One of the easier passages that his bills will have through the complicated administrative process that exists in the United States. And he's saying, as other countries continue to invest in their own research and development, we cannot risk falling behind. High US jobs vacancies, again, a record 9.3 million. Now, it's not bad that people want to employ people, but there is apparently an inability to fill roles in an economy that is over 8 million fewer people in the workforce than pre-pandemic. Does that mean, therefore, that employers are going to have to hike salaries to entice people back into work when the furlough runs out and so on? Well, that's an interesting one. We talked about the FBI and the colonial ransomware business yesterday and Bitcoin and so on. Question is, did the FBI actually crack a code? Well, they're saying that they didn't really. The move in Bitcoin, which has gone down a lot because we were expressing a bit of concern about how secure Bitcoin is given that. The court documents relating to this are saying that investigators were able to access the password for one of the hackers' Bitcoin wallets. It was about sloppy storage, they're saying, rather than being able to crack Bitcoin. But that news about Bitcoin not being quite as secure as people actually thought it was for whatever payments they want to make caused a breakdown to about 35,000, and it may even fall further. Talking about tax and talking about money, allegations that the richest men in the world, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk and Warren Buffett, pay actually very little tax indeed. This is leaked details to a website called ProPublica, which has seen the tax returns of some of the world's richest people, including Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk and Warren Buffett. And they're alleging that these people are actually not paying a great deal of tax. And of course, it comes at a time, doesn't it, when there's a growing debate about the amount of tax paid by wealthy people and the widening inequality of those who are not. The ProPublica says the richest 25 Americans pay less in tax than most mainstream US workers. That's quite a figure, isn't it? As far as tax is concerned, let's shift across the Atlantic to London. And we were talking about that global tax. They're going to be talking about that at the G7 this weekend. You know, that agreement that they had yesterday for the finance ministers meeting over last weekend. But both the UK and the EU, and I suspect other countries may want to do this as well, would like financial services exempted from these tax increases. Right companies paying the right taxes in the right places sounds very grand, doesn't it? But what's actually right? This, is, of course, is the eternal question. Financial services are incredibly important to most economies, particularly, of course, the survival of the City of London, which we've touched before, as many of the businesses actually move out. As far as commodities are concerned, oil has reversed Monday's losses. We're going to get some inventory figures later today. That will have an important fact. The US crude inventories number. Street's very, very long on oil right now, so we may see a bit of a dip off there. But still, that $70 a barrel, maybe even $80 a barrel, is still a long-term target for the oil price towards the end of the year. And gold, once again, testing that $1,900 an ounce thing overnight, not really getting there. Depends, again, on inflation figures and all the rest of it, which we will get tomorrow, and more ideas about where central banks are actually moving. That's your global view this morning. Good morning.
Do you remember Leona Helmsley of paying tax is for little people fame? Do you recall that scandal when she went to prison and she was like a huge real estate person in New York? And that's exactly what has been demonstrated with this situation where even Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire who ran for president, paid $0 in federal income tax. It's so embarrassing at this point, and something has to be done. You're completely right. These are household names. These are like the 1% of the 1%. Your average working American has to pay, and they don't. It's a disgrace, quite frankly.
Well, Michael Bloomberg is raising concerns about privacy, and that this is a violation of his privacy for that news website, ProPublica, to disclose private information. And Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, also says what has been done has been, an illegal act of disclosure. So at the end of the day, it looks like these rich people, Jeff Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, whom Tudu mentioned, will get away with it because the position is that they adopt methods that are perfectly legal. So why will it be possible for the rich to evade tax, to avoid tax, and it will be so difficult for smaller people within the community? I see here a case of hypocrisy, but I don't know what further comments you have on that. And quickly on the 250 billion bill that the Senate passed, well, something is clear in that regard. When it comes to China, it looks like American politicians tend to come together. They voted 68 to 32 against, 68 for, and the president is also waiting eagerly to sign the bill if it is passed by the House of Representatives. Do you see any possibility that there will be this kind of meeting of minds, this kind of enthusiasm across party lines in the Senate when other issues come up?
I'm sorry, to your point, Dr. Abati, ProPublica is doubling down and actually calling on whistleblowers to come forward, tax attorneys, tax consultants, and members of the public. They really don't care at this point.
Well.
Okay, Michael, you want to answer before I ask my question?
As far as the ProPublica leak is concerned, again, these are just allegations, and we don't know. And yes, it is a breach of privacy, if that's what people want to say. I think the problem is that the super rich have always got away with it, because you should never forget that they are incredibly mobile people, and they employ incredibly clever tax accountants and so on, because they can afford to. So I'm unsurprised by this. It doesn't make it any better or any worse, but it's just the way things are. That people like that actually are so mobile, they can move their money around the world at the switch of a computer, without a click of a computer button, without any problems whatsoever. And they employ people to make sure that they do actually pay as little tax as possible. That unfortunately is life. As far as the agreement in the United States is concerned, it's a very big bipartisan act, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's got a clear target as far as the security of the United States is concerned, and as far as semiconductor semiconductors are concerned, as far as intelligence and artificial intelligence and all the kind of things that the Americans would like to lead the world in, yes, of course it's got bipartisan support. And you're absolutely right, Doctor. I think that when it comes to actually internal affairs, i.e. the infrastructure plan that Joe Biden's trying to pass, I suspect that there will be a lot more trouble then, because the Republicans are already making noises, particularly, aren't they, about people being paid a lot of money not to work. I mean, we have all that furlough system to get out. We have the central bank spending, the central bank bond buying to flush out of the system. That's going to take a long time. And although 2024 sounds a long way away, it isn't really in administrative terms. So I think you're absolutely right. If it's got an immediate target, yes, bipartisanship actually works. It won't work as far as I can see, as far as infrastructure spending and the rest of it's concerned, because there will be objections right down to the wire.
All right, real quickly, Michael, I had a lot to say, but I can't say because of time, but I'll have to let you go. Thank you so much for your time. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic around the world, Adesuwa Mora is here with us. Adesuwa, great to have you.
Good morning, guys. Now, the coronavirus global cases have now surpassed 174 million, with at least 3.7 million others killed by the virus, and over 2.1 billion doses of vaccines have been administered globally. Distribution of vaccines remains highly uneven as countries develop more creative ways to get available jabs into arms. Here in Nigeria, 102 cases were reported in the last 24 hours, 102 new infections. Ondo State posted 68 of the new infections. According to the NCDC, the Bayelsa State data, which posted 17 cases, is as a result of a backlog between 9th and 25th of February this year. Another 56,495 individuals received a second dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine across Nigeria, while the country awaits a second shipment to move to other phases of vaccination. Those who have received the first jab must get a second dose for better coverage of immunity in this phase 1 second dose exercise. Elsewhere, Pfizer says it will begin to test its COVID-19 jab in a larger group of children below 12. The Pfizer vaccine says it is also selecting lower doses of the shot in an earlier stage of the trial. It will be interesting to see the data on the efficacy and safety of these lower doses on this age group. The study will enroll up to 4,500 children at more than 90 clinical sites in the United States, Finland, Poland, and Spain. While inoculating children is seen as a critical step towards achieving herd immunity, there are those who question the morality of vaccinating kids in some parts of the world when those who are most at risk of this virus infections and even death are yet to get any jabs. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has placed his health minister, Zweli Mkhize, on special leave after allegations his department irregularly awarded a COVID-19 related contract to a communications company controlled by his former aide. The Minister of Tourism, Mamaloko Kubayi Ngombane, will serve as acting health minister until further notice. And since last week, mobile phone users in Vietnam have received up to 3 text messages urging them to contribute to a COVID-19 vaccine fund, while civil servants have been encouraged to part with a day's pay. Vietnamese authorities are begging for public donations to buy vaccines as it struggles to contain a new coronavirus wave. By Tuesday, official statement from the country shows that more than 231,000 individuals and organizations had actually donated $181 million to the campaign. The Southeast Asian country has vaccinated only about 1% of its almost 100 million population.
Well, Adesuwa, first let's start with the corruption case. One of the major concerns for the WHO and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has been corruption in relation to COVID. And here in Africa, this is not the first case that we would have in South Africa. We've had cases here in Nigeria where the people's representatives took COVID palliatives and stored in their bedrooms for their own personal use or for birthday parties instead of making it available to people. And here in Nigeria, we've been calling for a proper audit the COVID-19 process. So before we talk about the cases in South Africa, we should also know that here in Nigeria, we need that kind of audit. And in some other countries, whistleblowers have drawn attention to similar cases. In Zimbabwe, I think, yes, in Zimbabwe, the health minister, the former health minister, he borrowed, that's the phrase that was used, $760 from COVID funds. He said he used it as his travel allowance when he went to South Africa. Of course, the president immediately fired him. There have been so many such cases across, Africa and other parts of the world as well. But in the case of the South African health minister, it's unfortunate because he's one of those persons that they were thinking would be the successor of President Ramaphosa, but he has not been directly fingered. 2 of his aides are said to have, been involved in this indecent behavior. But of course, I think President Ramaphosa did well by asking him to step aside for investigation, to go on a special leave, as it is called, for the case to be investigated. In Vietnam, well, interesting development in Vietnam. Vietnam was one of those countries that originally was commended for handling the pandemic. But then, of course, there is an upsurge in cases in Vietnam. Well, compared to other countries in Southeast Asia, you would probably say it's not such a high figure. I think it's about 9,000 or so out of a population of about 100 million people. Now, what they have done is to call on the community to contribute money to help the vaccination drive, the purchase of doses. And as at this moment, people have contributed about, is it $143 million? About that, right? $181 million,
yes.
Contributed so far by persons. Businesses have also made a pledge. But, that's the response to that appeal from the community, from individuals to put money down, is an indication, of a sense of public spiritedness in that community. Although there are persons who also have trust issues, but they constitute a minority in Vietnam. So I looked at it and I said, if this were Nigeria, in fact, people will be reluctant to contribute their money. So trust is important in terms of the relationship between the people and government. That's what Vietnam, in this regard, indicates. In my view.
I'm sure, Dr. Abati, you would not hesitate to contribute towards the COVID-19 doses.
Well, as a responsible citizen, why not? But I also have issues of trust at the back of my mind, but that's another subject.
Well, I guess I can contribute here. The Pfizer issue, the moral issue that you raised that some people feel, I completely sympathize with. It does seem a bit strange that the little ones are being vaccinated now, whereas you have the elderly who are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 in other climes who have not even had one jab. However, I have to say that a lot of those countries where people are vulnerable and are unvaccinated cannot actually use the Pfizer jab. It's not an option for them because they don't have the storage and the logistics to actually go around. So sometimes when we make these moral objections, even though they are logical, they're not always practical. My issue that I had with the Pfizer vaccine for 12-year-olds was the early reports of heart inflammation, especially coming out of Israel. But that has not gained any traction, I'm relieved to note. So it does appear at this point that those are really isolated incidents. Thank God.
Indeed. Israel says they've recorded 275 cases out of about 5 million administered in those age group.
For some reason.
Right, Adesso, I'd like to say a very big thank you for your time.